In the previous segment of this series, we demonstrated the standard method of cost allocation using the Home Cost Allocation tool. In this tutorial, we will show an example of the Proration Method. Remember, the Proration Method of cost allocation can be used only if the units in a project are comparable. With that caveat, however, this is a very common approach to cost allocation. In general, the idea behind proration is that if home represents 10% of the eligible cost in the project, then 10% of the units should be subject to home's affordability restrictions. It's a really straightforward concept, but as with many things, the devil can be in the details. There are many instances where PJs or their development partners have applied the proration approach improperly. One common error has been to look at home as a percentage of the total project cost, rather than as a percentage of the home-eligible project cost as HUD requires. Doing that has sometimes resulted in projects with too few home units, which is a significant compliance issue. Additionally, the proration method works to ensure that the home program is getting its fair share of each unit type, not just of the total count of units in the project. That's another way we've seen some issues in the past. When we go back to the cost allocation tool in a minute, you'll notice there are actually two different proration worksheets. This segment focuses on the first one, which uses the so-called dollars to units approach and is labeled as Proration Method Units Needed. This is the most common version to use and tells us how many units must be designated as home assisted, starting from the proposed home investment level. The second version goes the other way, units to dollars. That worksheet, which we'll talk about in the next segment, is much more limited in its application. It is only used if we're starting from a given set of units, and if those units are assigned in exactly the same proportion to each group or tranche of units in the project. As we'll see later, in practice, there are not many times things work out exactly that way. So with that, let's take a look at the cost allocation tool. For this segment, we'll be working from information about the project we originally identified as Case Study A in the earlier segments on both unit comparability and eligible versus ineligible cost. So you see initially that I've already started to enter the information. We had 10 one-bedroom, one-bath units, 60 two-bedroom, two-bath units. We've entered the average square footage at 846 and 1132, and we've indicated that yes, these are comparable in all of the respects that matter, and therefore the units are comparable. Because the units are comparable and we're starting from dollars and moving to units, we have two choices. We could use the standard method. We can always use the standard method, or we can use the proration method, units needed. As I noted earlier, we also have a proration method, dollars needed, that is used to go the other way, and we'll talk about that in our next segment. But for today, we're going to use the proration method, units needed. So we see the square footage has carried over from the selection of method page, 76,380 square feet inside of the units. The proposed home investment for this project was $700,070. The total development cost, if you happen to recall, is $13,283,816. We identified $1,156,516 of ineligible cost, or costs that we at least questioned as being eligible. There's no relocation involved. And so now let's see what's going on with the sheet. The base project cost is $12,127,300, which is $158 per square foot. Home at $700,070 represents 5.773% of the overall eligible project cost. In using the proration method, what happens, we're going to look here at the 10 units, is we have 10 one-bedroom, one-bath units. When we multiply 10 by that 5.773%, we get 0.577. That's the minimum number of home units. Of course, we can't give you 57 hundredths of a unit. We have to give one full unit. So we round up to the whole number. So we need one home unit among the one bedrooms, and in this case, we take the percentage, multiply it by 60. We get 3.464 is the minimum number of home units, but in real life that means we need to give 4 home units. So you see that we will have 5 total home units in this project. We have the one home unit at 846 square feet. The individual unit cost is $134,319. That's calculated by multiplying the average square footage times the base cost per square foot to get this, and then we take that individual unit cost and multiply it by the number of units. So down here we have 4 units costing $179,000 each, yielding a total of about almost $719,000. We add those together. The subtotal is $853,229. That is the actual cost of the home units, confined only to the eligible home cost. We then take again the maximum project subsidy. We got these numbers from our field office just like before. We have one bedroom unit at a maximum subsidy of $160,000, 4 2-bedroom units at $195,000. So the maximum project subsidy is $941,831. Now step 5 takes the least of these 3 numbers. We've proposed to invest just over $700,000. Those units actually are worth $853,000 as it were, based on their actual and eligible cost, and the maximum subsidy would be $941,000. So we've justified the investment of $700,070 home dollars for the 5 units that will now be home designated. What we notice is that by rounding up, home is getting marginally more than its fair share. But again, what happens is we can't allocate units on a partial basis. You either rent the whole unit with the home income and rent restrictions or you don't. So we always round up. And in most cases then what you're going to see is a marginal difference between the actual cost of those units and the proposed investment, because the math will just never work in a way, almost never work in a way, that those 2 numbers are exactly the same. So that's the proration method. It's actually pretty straightforward, and that's part of why it's so common. But again, we need to make sure that we're doing it properly, and the spreadsheet helps us do that. The key things that people have made mistakes on in the past are looking at home as a percentage of the total cost, as opposed to just the base project cost, as we call it in the spreadsheet, or the home eligible total cost, after removing those costs that are not eligible. And then also needing to round up and get at least our fair share of each unit type, as opposed to the project as a whole. We need to make sure that we've got at least 5.77% of each of the unit types. So those are the common mistakes that were made in the past, and this is why the spreadsheet has been developed to help people make sure that they avoid that.